Savage.
Truth.
We are the savages.
We are the savages.
The savage.
Truth.
The savage. The savage.
We are the savages.
The savages.
The savages.
We are the savages.
The savage.
Truth.
Yeah.
Scripted reality. Coincidences that prove that we live in a simulation. A script that life is that's wrote by a higher force. Let's check out some of these wild accounts that show exactly that. We'll start off with the question, can you be affected by something that happens in the future? Your body reacting in advance, something that already has happened in the spirit realm, just coming up on your timeline or the way that we process time. Any kind of impending doom-like burden could be related to this. And possibly you have a limited time to change some of these things. Also, biblical programs that seem to govern reality. We'll start off with something that you obviously may have heard of, and the examples get better, but how The Simpsons 14 years in advance predicted the Higgs boson God particle, this super important quantum physics CERN Hadron Collider process that Homer Simpson, of all people, had on a chalkboard in a cartoon episode 14 years in advance. Recently, I did a video called Things to Marvel At. What have the greatest minds in history baffled over? I gave one example of scripted reality to future plug this episode, and it was how there was a man named Hugh Williams, different Hugh Williams, that in 3 different centuries of shipwrecks, there was one sole survivor, and each time the survivor's name was Hugh Williams, and you're telling me that's not wrote. There's a lot more things just like this, including shipwrecks. Aside from the Titanic, which was wrote in advance and then happened to extraordinary detail, Violet Jessup survived 3 maritime disasters, including the sinking of the Titanic and its sister ship, the Britannic. Can you imagine not only being the sole survivor like Hugh Williams, but having survived 3 shipwrecks? In 1898, Morgan Robertson, an author, penned a novel telling the story of an unsinkable ship called the Titan that met its end after hitting the iceberg. And then just 14 years later, the Titanic suffered the near identical fate. Eerie similarities between the fictional Titan and the real Titanic disaster have fueled debate about prediction, chance, and the power of coincidence. The repeating lives of Edgar Allan Poe. Also, the shipwreck. The narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym describes a shipwreck where desperate survivors resort to cannibalism, choosing a victim named Richard Parker. Astonishingly, years after Poe's story was published, a real shipwreck echoed this grim scenario, right down to the victim's name. The bizarre overlap between fiction and reality leaves readers and historians alike wondering about the limits of coincidence. In 1900, King Umberto of Italy encountered a restaurant owner who wasn't just his physical double. They shared the same name, same birthday, same birthplace, and even had wives with the same name. The coincidence seemed endless, but the most astonishing was still to come. Both men died on the very same day. Such a convergence of life details blurs the line between chance and fate. Mark Twain, born in 1835, the same year Halley's Comet streaked across the sky. And then he predicted his death, saying he'd also go out with the comet. And the timing of his birth and death, that's exactly when it happened, with the comet appearance. Fascinating and poetic coincidence is what people say about it. In 1930s Detroit, an incredible coincidence unfolded when a baby fell from a window not once, but twice, and was saved each time by the same man, Joseph Figlock, who happened to be walking below both times at the exact time. The repeated miracle defies statistical odds and remains one of the most heart-stopping examples of fate's mysterious hand at work. I think they're really describing, again, this scripted reality wrote by the higher force, the Elohim, God's writing reality, basically. And again, God, the Most High Creator, and then again, maybe some beings under Him, maybe even fallen, that have also somehow have powers into all this stuff to make it happen. In a bizarre twist of fate, in 1883, Henry Ziegland survived a gunshot when the bullet became lodged in a nearby tree instead of striking him. Years later, an attempt to remove the tree with dynamite dislodged the very same bullet, fatally striking Ziegland. The story is a haunting reminder that destiny sometimes waits for just the right moment. The bullet that was delayed, but still finished the job. Another astonishing coincidence, identical twins separated at birth, meaning they were separated and then didn't have anything to do with each other, but reunited decades later only to find out they learned amazing things. They were both named Jim. They both had married women named Linda, divorced and then remarried women named Betty. And then each named their sons James Allen. Their uncanny parallel lives remind us just how mysterious fate can be. Two of the same Dennis the Menace characters debuted in 1951. I've talked about before about spontaneous invention phenomena, and this seems to fit in with that, of where do ideas even come from. There's a video on my page about that. But Dennis the Menace debuted in 1951, one in the UK and one in the US without any knowledge of each other. Despite independent origins, both versions became beloved cultural fixtures, highlighting the strange synchronicity that sometimes occur in creative worlds. Again, this all leading to the higher scripted reality, which is going to lead to another question and a conclusion later. Also, James Dean had a cursed Porsche. It caused 5 deaths. It was a Porsche 550 Spider. Again, it killed him. It killed the mechanic that worked on it. Parts were sold. The engine killed somebody. The tires killed somebody. This is ridiculous. If you want to talk about something being cursed, this is a perfect example of it. 1948, Israel became a nation. This is reflected through time. 1948 is when Abraham was born. 1948, as in 1948 years after creation, is when Abraham was born. And then Jesus came, reset the clock, and then 1948 years later, Israel, who Abraham started, became a nation. Time reflection, that's a time mirror. One of the best examples of this scripted reality, definitely beyond coincidence, is with Lincoln and Kennedy. You may have heard it before. Aside both being shot in the head on Friday in the presence of their wife by a Southerner with 3 names, 15 letters, both killed before trial. Booth fled a theater and was caught in a warehouse. Oswald in reverse. And there's a lot more. In fact, Jordan Maxwell explains it on this clip. It's about a 2-minute clip, but it's completely fascinating. Listen to all these details.
Abraham Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846. John Kennedy was elected to Congress in 1946. Abe Lincoln was elected president in 1860. John Kennedy was elected president in 1960. The names Lincoln and Kennedy both contain 7 letters. Both presidents were particularly concerned with civil rights. Both of the president's wives lost children while living in the White House. Both presidents were shot on a Friday in the head. President Lincoln's secretary was named Miss Kennedy. Kennedy's secretary was named Miss Lincoln. Both were assassinated by Southerners. Both were succeeded by Southerners. Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln, was born in 1808. Lyndon Johnson, who succeeded Kennedy, was born in 1908. John Wilkes Booth, who assassinated Lincoln, was born in 1839. Lee Harvey Oswald, who assassinated Kennedy, in 1939. Both assassins were known by 3 names: John Wilkes Booth, Lee Harvey Oswald. Both names are comprised of 15 letters. President Lincoln was shot in a theater named Ford. Kennedy was shot in a car named Lincoln, made by Ford. John Wilkes Booth ran to a theater and was caught in a warehouse. Oswald ran from a warehouse and was caught in a theater. Booth and Oswald were both assassinated before they could go to trial. And a week before Lincoln was shot, he was in Monroe, Maryland. A week before Kennedy was shot, he was with Marilyn Monroe.
Also, the way these were separated by a century with the same numbers governing all of this, it's like a century cycle, or recycled sim programming or something or someone higher really trying to get our attention for the ones paying attention. Also, Conspiracy 101, who really killed Kennedy? When I was in high school, there was sort of a teacher who was into conspiracies, I guess, who was ahead of his time, had us do a report on this. And this is when I really started to see the truth in high school about how there were organizations above everything that controlled everything. And I'm talking about even on a human level. And even things like if you check out the Zapruder film and Anomalies and the weird umbrella man who pumps an umbrella right before the shot on a day that wasn't rainy, and just lots of weird anomalies. This was definitely not the official story that they gave us as far as what actually happened. Also, speaking of Kennedy, if you want to talk about generational curses and how they follow down the family line, if you study into the Kennedy family and look at all the tragedies and stuff that they went through, this would definitely, to me, be an example of a generational curse. Speaking of presidents, I talked about scripted reality before, about time-traveling Trump, and even the novel about Baron Trump, who had a mentor named Don, and lots of other things. I think that was on The Great Illusion I mentioned that. Kind of weird. Also, in the assassination attempt, there was also another scripted reality moment, the assassination attempt on President Trump. If you noticed, when he was shot in the ear, blood on his ear, then he got blood on his thumb, somehow his shoe fell off and he got blood on his big toe. The ear, thumb, and big toe with blood is a high priest ritual. Is this God anointing Donald Trump? This was beyond coincidence. So one thing that may actually be a coincidence, the Old Testament, referred to as the OT. Oat, spelled OT, is a Hebrew word that means sign. An oat is a sign. Speaking of oat, the ultimate form of a sign is the stars in the sky. The stars being the ultimate scripted reality. All the symbols, constellations actually tell a story. That story, not coincidentally, is the same as the Bible. In fact, I think my most viewed video, it's under 5 minutes, goes into it. Probably one of my most important videos I did. Check it out. I'll leave a link at the end. Also, worth mentioning before we move on from presidents, the unstoppable, bulletproof, prophesied in advance George Washington. George Washington could not be killed in battle. He had battles where horses were shot out from underneath him, bullet holes all through his coat. One of the Native American chiefs said he shot him 17 times at point blank range and hit him, but he didn't drop. In fact, this was all prophesied about in advance. There was prophecies about him. Also, George Washington had strange dreams and visions, I think a series of 3 about the future and end of America. Also maybe worth checking out. More scripted reality, that's not a coincidence. Kobe Bryant and Kyle Busch, same initials, KB, same age, 41, both dying immediately after battling Big Pharma or receiving settlements from them, or insurance companies. By the numbers. Also worth mentioning on the topic of scripted reality, that ties in with everything, literally, is this hidden set of clues that Yahweh gave us. Esoteric connections that church will never tell you, but point to the truth. Scripted reality kind of has a crossover with coded fiction. I'm going to release a coded fiction comp where I've done several different shorts and TikToks about fiction that's actually encoded with reality. It'll be a completely different data set and fascinating. One of the things I've mentioned about Jules Verne and how people think that all these stories are real. You're talking about things with Captain Nemo, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Journey to the Center of the Earth, Advanced Tech in the Past, Legends of Treasure, Secret Islands and Secret Lands. A lot of people believe this and works like this, including Shakespeare, Sherlock Holmes, and other things, are coded fiction. Again, I'll have a completely different data set and lots of examples and new stuff on the coded fiction comp. You can check that out. The coded fiction comp will also include a brand new episode in it, just like this, about a 4,000-year-old folktale that has real demonology themes in it. It'll be fascinating. A tale told all over the world for thousands of years. Also, real quick, all the comps or compilations, they're unique. There are no doubles. Each one will just be completely unique and never repeat on any other comp, with the exception of, I think, maybe one that I know about. When I did the spiritual animal phenomenon, and then I just kept going because it was so fascinating, I decided to compile all of them together. You can check that out as well. I'll go ahead and mention this now, that Humpty Dumpty is believed to be coded fiction, but nobody really knows what it is. There's a belief that it was like an ancient technology. To me, this is Osiris. This is the story of Osiris, an ancient AI megacomputer that was destroyed and nobody really could put it back together again. More on that maybe on the coded fiction. I'll give some details. an ancient machine, sentient AI, Quantumania Modec type of a mode. But Nimrod, as the grid itself beast system, is sort of what you'll see in the future of the re-emergence of Osiris, just on a mega level. All of these things are connected. Recently, I just released Savage Shop of Wonders. You should check that out. So much unbelievable information. Definitely has a Ripley's Believe It or Not type of feel. But also, I'd mentioned Coded Fiction. Mary had a little lamb. That is code for Jesus, obviously, and Mary. But also, on the theme of songs, in the Underground Railroad, songs and tones were used to communicate, which is brilliant and awesome, overcoming oppression. Basically, if they would sing some of their hymns in certain tones, it meant certain things, that there was danger or whatever. So just singing the same song but in different tones, only perceptible to them, is brilliant. And again, overcoming oppression is awesome. I'm going to include a quick numerology before we dip out. This short little fascinating tap-in was just to get your mind thinking, and will all again lead to something. But the same numbers in both stories of Jesus and Samson are present. It's like the same numbers or patterns govern lives. And it's again evident with this story. Probably everybody's life is governed by numbers and patterns that they just can't figure out. This is math. This is a literal algorithm in reality. And if you look back at your own life with the right perspective, knowledge, and memory, I bet you'll see a lot of these things. Patterns and codes with deeper meanings. Samson and Jesus were both betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, or also 30 garments. Actually was in the Samson story, the number 30, and both sacrificed themselves, resulting in greater damage to the enemy in death than in life. Jesus between the two crosses is the same as Samson between the two pillars, which I've covered. But both were divine births preceded by angelic visitation. If you look at the birth account of Samson, this was not a normal human being. Preceded by angelic visitation, both were deliverers of God's people and both judges. Samson in the past and Jesus in the future and ultimately. Both have a story about a donkey. The donkey jawbone was Samson and Jesus riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. They both have a lion in their story. Jesus is the lion and Samson with the lion. They both have honey and foxes mentioned in their story. Both were bound by their own people and arrested, and both even had a helper at the end. The boy who led Samson to the pillars and Simon who helped Jesus carry his cross. And again, the numerology, you'll find the numbers 1, 3, 7, 30, 40, and 1,000 are the numbers that govern their lives in both stories. I find this completely fascinating. Again, algorithms in reality, scripted reality. Also, I'll do a future numerology video that'll be fascinating, some savage math. Also, the dark side tries to tap on this with false synchronicities and false numerology. I've warned you about that before. But biblical programming patterns, timelines that people are in, like an operating system within the sim. What biblical pattern are you in? It might change throughout life. You might find through different lives and seasons, your life is paralleling a biblical program pattern like Joseph or Samson, or just various different programming patterns in people's real life parables and sentient algorithm stories in the Bible that actually all really happened. Again, this is all tapping into the highest realm. Even the movie The Omega Code sort of tapped into this multi-layered Bible code that has been around since, at least it was, I think the 90s is when it was discovered. And then even how the elite would falsely try to play out some of these prophecies that were also in the book. But there's a lot of weird things about the Bible code. There'll be some things you can find if you check it out. There'll be dismissive things and obviously some hoaxes, but undeniable things, including the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin and just millions of other things encoded within the Bible. Is your life actually encoded in the Bible code somewhere? If you skip every 7 letters or semi-distant, equidistant separating of the characters, this is when a lot of these things emerge. It's impossible almost to just do it with a basic read-through. Moses has an interesting pattern about, well, more of a symbolic thing about why he wasn't let into the promised land. He struck a rock and God didn't let him into the promised land. And again, there's more to the story. Moses represented the law. The law will never come into the promised land. For one, Jesus is the fulfillment of the law. Jesus, real name, Joshua. Again, Joshua goes into the promised land. That is Jesus. Joshua crosses over. Jesus crosses us over The sky, the seas above, it mentions there is a crystal sea above. It mentions that there's waters above multiple times in the Bible. Yeshua, Joshua, Jesus will cross us over. Again, this ties into also, I had mentioned in the Marvel video that I did, Things to Marvel At, I had mentioned Moses being one of the two witnesses, but I didn't mention that this is also related to why the devil wanted his body, another fascinating mystery you can find a short on my page about. All this is connected. Also, speaking of the Savage Shop of Wonders, lots of interesting things I mentioned there, but the burning bush in Moses, while we're on the topic of Moses. Can you imagine this burning, talking plant, which, wasn't really a talking plant, but in a way it was, and how weird that would be. Savage Shop of Wonders also includes things like the Tartary vegetable lamb, the Yadoni, and lots of other things. The old world was completely fascinating. On a random tidbit, did you know in all medieval manuscripts, and tons of them, there is tons of mentions about giant snails and knights fighting them, and no one knows why. And of course, some of the academic curriculum will say it's a joke, but they admit they really don't know why. And it's obviously because there were giant snails, giant everything basically, and they were really fighting them. Something you could read right over about Moses and not really think about it is when he was on top of the mountain and the Israelites were in absolute fear and terror of the Lord, and they kept begging Moses to make the Lord go away. There was flashes of lightning, noises, trumpeting, thunder, all sorts of things like fire and other things that were just terrifying the Hebrews. So you got to wonder, what was Moses doing up there the whole time? Was he able to sleep? Was he just talking to God, watching? What was actually happening? And he comes back with this glow on his face. What was he really doing up there for 40 days when he came back with the law? Which, by the way, by tradition was transcribed in sapphire tablets, which I also have a video about. The Israelites were basically afraid of the holiness of the Lord and the presence of him they just couldn't tolerate. I had a dream one time, only once in my life, where I saw the Lord in a dream. And I didn't really see him, just his presence came into my room, and I wanted to just hide under the floorboard. Literally, I was trying in my dream to crawl underneath the floorboard, based surely off the presence of his holiness and my unworthiness. Things we all have absolutely no idea about in this modern world. Unless you've had an experience. If you have, drop it in the comments. All the talk of shipwrecks earlier on, and the Titanic, the unsinkable ship that was sank. And then God gave the blueprints for the ark, which went through the ultimate disaster of all time and lasted perfectly. Also, not a coincidence. The divine blueprint. The Bible, the ultimate encoded manual, and your life. The book of life. The book of life is a real book in heaven. Angels and other people write books. I bet you didn't know that. There is a book of your life. There's an angel watching, inscribing everything that you do, inscribing your life. And for those that are sons of the King, your life has been wrote in advance and you're living it out, sort of like your own movie that to you is real time you're experiencing. There's also lots of other books in heaven. Aside from the book of your life and the book of life, the book of works is the one that records all of your actions. There's also the book of remembrance that rewards faith, hidden tears, eternal crowns, and those who remember the Lord. These books of life will determine what crowns you receive. Scripted reality leaves many questions. One of these, are we inside of a TV show? And I mean that completely 100% literally. And while it might not actually be a TV, there is this sort of watching technology that a higher civilization is watching all of this. I'm going to give you in the future, I don't know when it will come out, but it will be called The Real Truman Show. And again, tying into The Truman Show, but also a play on words because Harry Truman in the 40s, during his presidency, The Real Truman Show began is when there was an insane timeline of so many important events that happened in a row that led us to this end timeline that we're in, The Real Truman Show. Be on the lookout for it. Until then, make sure you're the master of your own scripted reality, and the master's hand is on your life. Remember, He is the author and the finisher of your faith, especially if you submit your life to Him. Keep trusting Him through the hardships and the hard times, and take all this as evidence that there is a higher force at work. Until then, I'll see you next time on The Savage Truth. Your life is a book filled with mysteries waiting to be revealed. One of the main mysteries we have is time. And when the book of our life is closed, the book of life is open. And if Yeshua is the main character of your story, and you've accepted His invitation, then your name will be called out in the heavens in the presence of the King. Well done.
Savage.
Truth.
What up,
We
man?
are the savages.
We are the savages.
The savage.
The savage.
We are the savages.
The savages.
The savages.
We are the savages.
The savage. Savage.